About nanometer, in contrast to bacteria micrometer. They are obligative intracellular living. Obligative intracellular living. They have so dependent to their host cells. Their metabolism, their multiplication is so dependent to host cells. They can infect prokaryotes just as bacteria, alga, plants, animals, and human cells, because they are so dependent to host cells. About history of viruses, the first person who described viruses was Ivanovsky. Ivanovsky observed when he used the bacterial filters, some extract may be involved and infected, and it was virus. Of course, he didn't know what it is. After him, some other scientists, just as Loeffler and Frusch, for the first time observed foot and mouth disease viruses. And after Loeffler and Frusch, Egering was the first person that used the name of virus or a kind of toxin. Of course, he thought it is a kind of toxin. After he discovered bacteriophage. As you know, I told you yesterday, bacteriophage is a kind of virus. Bacteriophage or phage or virus. After Tort Stanley stabilized and crystallized the viruses out of cells and told they are similar to organic materials. They are so similar to organic materials because they are so dependent on host cells. And finally, in 1945, Rodenberg discovered and invented electron microscope and observed the viruses. And in 1983, Mullis discovered PCR or polymerase chain reaction for diagnosis, for rapid diagnosis with a good sensitivity and specificity for virus detection. Each viruses has two sections. Each virus has two sections. First, nucleic acid. Harry, please bring for me a highlighter. All our viruses have nucleic acid. Of course, you must know the viruses only DNA virus or RNA virus, not both of them. There are DNA virus or RNA virus, not both of them. The second part is capsid. Capsid is a protein layer, surrounded nucleic acid. Protein layer, surrounded nucleic acid. Capsid is multiplication of capsomers. Some capsomer, yes, makes capsid. Capsid is so important for viruses because it has three duties. First, it is penetrating agent to host cells. And the first attachment is from capsid. The second rule and the second duty is protecting agent because surrounded nucleic acid and around nucleic acid. And also because the genus of capsule is protein, it has antigenic effect. It has three roles. The first, penetrant. Second, protecting. And finally, antigenic surface. The duty and the rule of capsid. Capsid has three duties: antigenic, protecting, and penetrating. Combination of nucleic acid and capsid makes virion. Virion is a complex of nucleic acid and capsid. Virion. All of viruses have virion. All of viruses have virion. Of course, some viruses may be another added. For example, some viruses have virion. Some viruses have envelope. Envelope is bilipid layer in some viruses. Bilipid layer. And it sensitizes the virus to solvent just as alcohol and ether. It sensitizes the viruses. Furthermore, some viruses have spike. The genus of spike is protein or glycoprotein. Spike increases the attachment of virus to epithelial cells. And some viruses have M protein. M protein is so important for assembly of virus products. For assembly. When you have early protein, late protein, and genomic reproduction, and they need to assemble, M protein is so important. It is so important in some diseases. For example, in slow virus infection, we have defect in M protein, and it causes a slow protein or a slow virus disease, just as SSPE, subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, or PMLE, polymorphonuclear disease, or progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. Progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy due to JC virus. The relationship between capsid and nucleic acid has 3 or 4 folds. The first is spherical. Spherical just as influenza virus. Some viruses are helicoid, similar to spherical, just as TMB was the first viruses described, Ivanovsky, tobacco mosaic virus, TMB. Some viruses are polyhedral or icosahedral, just as adenovirus. And finally, sometimes we have mixed or combined or complicated virus, just as phage, and sometimes HBV, hepatitis B virus, or sometimes pox viridae, pox. There are examples from configuration between nucleic acid and capsid. We have 4 types. First,
polyhedral.
Maybe poly just as adenovirus. The second, helicoid just as TMB. Third, yes, just as yes. And finally, mixed or combined or complicated, just as HBV or phage or pox viruses. This is 4 type of configuration between nucleic acid and capsids. Yes. It is so important you know and identify classification of viruses just as bacteria. We have some criteria. We have some criteria for identifying of viruses classification. The first and the most important is replication of viruses. Replication. It is important you know the virus is DNA or RNA. And the quality of replication is so important. Replication is very important. And divided the viruses to RNA virus and DNA viruses. The second criteria is enveloped or non-enveloped. Non-enveloped or naked. Naked virus. For example, some viruses have envelope, just as herpes viride, herpes. And some viruses are naked, just as picorna. Picorna virus, for example, polioviruses. They are naked. The third criteria for classification is the kind of configuration. The kind of configuration. I told you we have 4 types of configuration: helicoid, spherical, mixed, and polyhedral. The type of configuration is the third pathway for classification. The fourth way is sensitivity to solvents. Just as ether and alcohol. Envelope viruses are so sensitive to solvents and destroy the envelope of virus. Envelope is so sensitive to solvents. Some enzymes for example, HIV virus has a reverse transcriptase enzyme. Reverse transcriptase enzyme. It is so important for converting of RNA virus to DNA virus. And it's so important for replication. And also, HBV, hepatitis B virus, has reverse transcriptase. 2 viruses are important. The first, no, I know. The first virus is reverse transcriptase. Which name? HIV. The second, U, in the middle part, yes. The second virus with reverse transcriptase is HBV, hepatitis B virus. These group of viruses have reverse transcriptase. Reverse transcriptase is a kind of DNA polymerase. And also, some viruses have RNA polymerase. RNA polymerase is a kind of RNA replicase, which is needed for replication. Some viruses have specific antigen. For example, in influenza, we have 2 types of protein, hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. As you heard before, in influenza we have some type H1N1, H2N2, H3N2, H5N1. It is so important in palindromy and epidemic of influenza. Which type involved the world? For example, now we are involved with H1N1. All of the world involved with influenza H1N1. The seventh pathway is tropism. Tropism or tendency. Tropism or tendency of virus to specific organ. For example, rabies virus is so interested to central nervous system. Rabies. Or enterovirus is so important to gastrointestinal tract. Or corona is so interested to respiratory tract. It depends on the organ. Some viruses maybe change their tropism and tendency. And finally, production of inclusion bodies. Inclusion bodies. For example, in rabies disease, we have negroid body. Negroid body is so important for detection and diagnosis of rabies. It is a specific pathologic lesion. Specific pathologic lesion in cytoplasm or nucleus. And when you see negroid body, it means which disease? Rabies. It means rabies. Negroid body equals with rabies disease. Well, what was the first? What was the first criteria of taxonomy? The kind of replication. The second? Envelope or non-envelope or neck. The third what was? Configuration. The fourth, sensitivity to ether and alcohol. Five, what was? Specific protein and antigen. The sixth, tendency or tropism. Seventh, some enzyme, just as reverse transcriptase. And finally, inclusion body, just as negroid body in rabies. They are so important for detection and diagnosis of some viruses. I told you the best criteria for classification and dividing a virus is the kind of replication, or DNA virus or RNA. Now, we must know the type of replication. What is replication of viruses? And what's the differences between it and eukaryote and prokaryote cells? The first step is adsorption. Adsorption or absorption or superficial attachment. Superficial attachment of virus to epithelial cells or host cells. It is the steps of replication. The first step is adsorption. In the host cells, we have about 100,000 to 500,000 receptors for viruses. And it is so important for infection, superficial attachment. The charge of viruses is negative, and we need to some element just as magnesium for absorption. When absorption or adsorption occurs, the second step is penetration. penetration of virus to host cells. We have two mechanisms for penetration. For non-enveloped virus or naked virus, we have a kind of endocytosis. Endocytosis related to receptor. Endocytosis related to receptor for naked or non-enveloped viruses. But for enveloped virus, we need to fusion or integration. The cell of the membrane of virus attached and integrate to cell membrane of host cell. What's your question?
Endocytosis, the host will eat the virus.
It's needed for non-enveloped virus, and it is active transport.
Yes.
It needs a carrier. The carrier is a kind of receptor. Is carried and transported. Yes, the virus, of course, non-enveloped virus, can try to membrane of host cells. The third step is uncoating. In this step, the acidity of host cells dissolve and destroy the capsid and release nucleic acid. Nucleic acid in this step release. Uncoating. Which uncoating? Capsid uncoating or capsomer uncoating. After uncoating, we have specific step, Clives. In the Clives step, we have disappearing of nucleic acid because the size of virus nucleic acid is very, very small, about 1 to 1,000 times less. The nucleic acid is so small and you cannot see it. Only with magnification of electron microscope you can see the genome of viruses. After Clives, we have protein synthesis. Protein synthesis. In protein synthesis, we have three levels. First, synthesis of early protein. Second, أهلا وسهلا.
Excuse me, Doctor. In the high school, we studied that viruses don't show any vitality process. Don't show any vitality process in them. It diffuse to another bodies like bacteria or something like that.
I couldn't understand.
He said that the virus is like bodies, she doesn't live in a little, she gets in other bodies.
Yes, it's true.
Yes.
It's true. It's just as organic. I told you, just as organic materials in the extracellular. In the extracellular lives just as organic materials. But when it enters or goes to host cells, it uses from some products and about multiplication, about genomic reproduction, and synthesis of some protein, just as early and late protein or structural proteins. In protein synthesis, I told you we have three levels. The first level is early protein synthesis. The second level is genomic reproduction. Genomic reproduction. With using of nucleic acid of host cells. And finally, we have late protein synthesis. Late or structural protein. In protein synthesis, we have three steps. First, early protein. Second, genomic reproduction. And finally, late protein or structural protein synthesis. Early protein has regulatory roles. Regulatory, and it's so important in some cancers. Early protein is cancer. And it's so important in malignancy. For example, HBV or hepatitis B virus causes hepatocellular carcinoma. Hepatocellular carcinoma. Or EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus, kind of herpes viride, causes Burkitt lymphoma. Is a kind of malignancy. And papillomaviruses. Papillomaviruses causes endocervix carcinoma. And laryngeal carcinoma. And also HTLV1, human T lymphotropic viruses, causes leukemia. Leukemia. There are some examples from the beauty and importance of viruses and cancers. For example, hepatitis B viruses causes hepatocellular carcinoma. Epstein-Barr viruses causes Burkitt lymphoma. Papillomaviruses causes endocervix carcinoma and also laryngeal carcinoma. And also HTLV1, human T lymphotropic viruses, causes leukemia, Hair cell leukemia, of course. The protein synthesis may be differ between DNA viruses and RNA viruses. It is so important for your exam. All of DNA virus, so important for your examination. All of DNA virus replicate in nucleus of host cells. The only exception is Pax viride. The only exception is Pax viride. Pax viride, just as variola major, variola minor, vaccinia, and ORF virus. There are some type of Pax viride. All of DNA virus can replicate, and necessary the nucleus of host cell for their replication. The only exception is Pax viride, just as variola major, variola minor, vaccinia, and ORF. Because these viruses have some about 100 enzymes and can replicate in cytoplasm. Yes. And all of RNA viruses must be reproduced in cytoplasm. The only exception is orthomyxoviride, just as influenza. Orthomyxoviride, just as influenza virus. All of DNA viruses in nucleus. Exception is Pax viride. All of the RNA viruses replicate in cytoplasm. Only exception is orthomyxoviride, just as influenza viruses. Some viruses may be multiplied with different pathway. For example, HIV. HIV has reverse transcriptase and uses from reverse transcriptase that I told you is a kind of DNA polymerase and causes RNA to DNA. Some differences between another. The sixth level of multiplication and replication of viruses is assembly. In this step, you have early protein, late protein, or capsid and capsomer, and genomic reproduction, and they must be assembled with to other. Sometimes we have in this step some errors. For example, when your capsid would be around host cells, you have pseudovirion. Pseudo is not real. It's fake. Pseudovirion. And if you would have the capsid of viruses around a incomplete virus or defective virus, you have defective virus, just as delta virus. Delta virus is so dependent to HBV, to hepatitis B viruses, because it has not all of system for replication. And finally, you have release from host cells. It has two mechanisms. In non-enveloped viruses, we have lysis of host cells. Directly lysis the host cells. And in enveloped viruses, we have fusion, just as entrance. Or integration, first lysis in non-enveloped virus. And in enveloped virus, we have fusion or integration with cell membrane of host cells, fusion, or budding formation. Well, please, you tell me, the first step of replication, first step, absorption. The second step, penetration. The third step, uncoating. The fourth step, eclipse. The fifth step, protein synthesis. Early protein, late protein, and genomic reproduction. The sixth, assembly. And finally, release with two mechanisms. First, lysis. Second, fusion. Very good. Tell another section and I will show to you. Just as bacteria, it is so important taxonomy and nomination of viruses. Taxonomy, dividing and nomination of viruses. When you say herpes, for example, herpes viridae, in the end of virus names means family of virus. Family. Just as enterobacteria, CA bacteria. CA means family. In viruses, viridae means family. When you tell herpes virinae in the end of bacteria, it means subfamily. For example, in herpes viridae, we have three types of subfamily: alpha herpes virinae, beta herpes virinae, and gamma herpes virinae. Alpha, beta, and gamma herpes virinae. Herpes viridae is a family. It has three subfamily. Subfamily with virinae at the end of viruses. For example, alpha herpes virinae, beta herpes virinae, and gamma herpes virinae. when you use capital letter in the first name of virus, it means genus. Genus. Capital letter. And when you use a small letter, it means species. Just as bacteria, we had species and genus. For example, Escherichia coli. Escherichia was genus and coli was species. Antivirus, herpes, the capital letter is genus, and simplex, small letter is species. Well, I told you, please notice much more. Viruses are obligate intracellular parasites because they are so dependent to host cells in their metabolism, in their multiplication. They do not meet the criteria to qualify as alive. They are just as organic materials. Virus can be categorized by the type of cell that they infect. For example, they may be infect bacteria or bacteriophage or phage and may be involved and infected eukaryote cells. Viruses are simple, acellular, distinct pattern of multiplication, and they have no cytoplasmic membrane, they have no cytosol, they have no functional organelle, just as mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, and reticulum endoplasmic, and ribosomes. And their metabolic activity is so dependent to host cells. I told you the viruses are only RNA or DNA, not both of them. And protein casing is capsid of virus. Protein casing is capsid or accompany of capsomers. You can see, I told you some viruses, of course, in animal virus we have envelope or bilipid layer. Envelope, for example, herpes viridae, envelope at the outer surface of capsid. About the size range, most of viruses less than 0.2 micrometer or about nanometer and requires electron microscope for much more observation. About the structure of viruses bear no resemblance to cell, lack protein synthesizing machinery, and contain only the part needed to invade and control a host cell. In extracellular, viruses are not alive and they need to host cell for living. I told you some example, envelope virus just as DNA virus just as herpes viruses, RNA virus just as HIV, and non-envelope or naked RNA virus just as poliovirus or picornavirus, and also RNA virus envelope just as HIV. And DNA virus, as you know, naked adenoviruses. The duty of capsid, first protect genome and also aids in transfer between hosts and also penetrating agent and antigenic because the genus of capsid is protein. I told you we have some type of capsid. Helical, icosahedral or polyhedral, and complex or mixed. Helical just as TMV, tobacco mosaic virus. Polyhedral or icosahedral just as adenovirus. Spherical just as influenza. And complex or mixed just as phage or bacteriophage. This is a graph of electron microscope with no staining. It is negative staining. Negative staining for observation of some viruses. For example, you can see influenza virus, spike of influenza. You can see spike of influenza. In some viruses, we have another section, tegument. Tegument is a layer between capsid and envelope. Tegument is between capsid and envelope. And it's so important in some viruses, just as herpes viridae. Herpes, yes. Some shape of virus, for example, HIV, hepatitis B, Ebola virus, adenovirus, influenza, rabies virus, bacteriophage, papillomavirus, rotavirus, and herpes virus. Some of them are DNA virus, some of them RNA virus. I told you the importance of capsid, penetrating and protecting an antigenic effect. And envelope is a good substrate for some material and solvents, just as alcohol and ether. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome. Welcome. You can see some viruses are DNA, some RNA. Some of viruses single-stranded, some of them double-stranded. Some viruses linear or simple, and some of them circular. About nucleic acid, I told you RNA or DNA. And some enzyme is so important. For example, in HIV virus, we need to reverse transcriptase that coded RNA virus to DNA. And in some viruses, especially in RNA viruses, we need to RNA replicate. It needs replication of virus and synthesis of protein, just as early protein and late protein. I told you we have some step and the level of replication. First, adsorption, penetration, uncoating. Of course, between uncoating and protein synthesis, we had clives. And protein synthesis, early protein, late protein, and genomic reproduction and produce, assembly, and release. You can see first attachment, second entry or penetration, third replication, fourth assembly, and finally release with exocytosis or budding, and also with fusion or integration. How virus is classified, I told you, Viridae at the end of virus means family. Virina means subfamily. The capital letter means genus and small letter species. Yes. We have some criteria for classification. First, morphology, second, structural protein, and genome properties. In DNA viruses, we have two types, single-stranded, double-stranded. Single-stranded, only unenveloped, just as parvoviruses. Double-stranded, enveloped, and are unenveloped or non-enveloped, just as herpes and just as adeno. But RNA virus is divided four groups. Positive sense. Positive sense means the viruses can reproduce independently and doesn't need to host cells. Negative sense means it needs to already replicate. sometimes we have the positive, negative situation, and sometimes in some double-stranded viruses, RNA via DNA, and some viruses just as HIV. We have some criteria for naming of viruses: appearance, geographic region of discovery. Welcome. Do you have? Oh, welcome, welcome. It's honorable. We have some criteria for virus naming: appearance, geographic region of discovery, disease date, causes, and route of transmission. We have some route for transmission. For example, in arboviruses and in rabies, skin is so important. In some viruses, just as corona, influenza, parainfluenza, measles, rubella, adenovirus, respiratory tract. In some viruses, just as enterovirus, hepatitis A virus, and adenovirus, gastrointestinal tract. Sometimes genitourinary tract is so important. For example, in HIV and in herpes viridae, cytomegalovirus and Epstein virus, genitourinary is so important. In some viruses, transplacental from mother to child is so important. For example, hepatitis B or HIV and cytomegalovirus and rubella, they can transfer from placenta from mother to child. And sometimes we have transfusion, blood transfusion, just as HCV, HBV, HIV. They are the way of transport of viruses, just as skin, gastrointestinal, respiratory tract, genitourinary tract, transplacental, and also blood transfusion. Any question? Any repeat each section that you want? No. Right. To the body. When a virus enters to the body, we have two situations. First is primary viremia. Viremia means circulation of virus in blood transfusion. Yes? When the virus enters the body, we have primary viremia. In this step, we have no symptom and sign. We have no symptom and signs. And the patient is asymptomatic or prodromal symptoms. Prodromal, and it is public, just as sneezing, coughing. They are not so important for diagnosis. The second step is secondary viremia. Secondary viremia is the step that the virus can pass from reticuloendothelial system, just as immune system. For example, liver, spleen. And in this step, we have a specific symptom and signs. This is so important for diagnosis. We have two steps when the virus enters the body. Primary, secondary. In primary step, we have asymptomatic or prodromal, and in secondary, we have specific symptom and signs. For example, we have gastrointestinal diarrhea, in respiratory tract coughing, In skin disease, we have rash. We have some type of viruses, and some infectious viruses. The first is self-limited. The type of virus infections. First is self-limited. For example, common cold. All of us have experience of common cold. Self-limited doesn't need two specific drugs or antiviral drugs. Self-limited, it will be controlled with some anti-fever, just as acetaminophen and aspirin. Immune system. Yes, and immune system control the infection. Self-limited. Some viruses are congenital, just as rubella and CMV, cytomegalovirus. They causes congenital disease from mother to child, from transplacental. Some viruses causes persistent infection. Persistent for long-acting disease. Long-acting disease, just as HPV, HCV, and HIV. They cause long-acting disease. Sometimes we have latent infection. Just as herpes disease, for example, CMV, herpes simplex, EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. It's a good experiences for all of us. All of us has experience from varicella or chickenpox. Chickenpox for the first time exposure, and after chickenpox we would have zona. Slow virus infection, just as SSPE, subacute sclerosing panencephalitis due measles. After 30 years of measles, because to lack of M protein causes SSPE. It is generalized paralysis. SSP, about 20 or 30 years after measles. A slow virus infection, because these viruses have a slow multiplication, because they have no M protein in their systems. Or PMLE, progressive multifocal local encephalopathy. Progressive multifocal local encephalopathy due to JC, Jerry Cunningham viruses. Jerry Cunningham. Or cow-mad disease, you have seen. Cow-mad disease due to perion. After contaminated meat. After digestion of contaminated meat. And finally, some viruses causes hemorrhagic disease, just as CCHF, Congo kerime hemorrhagic fever. Congo kerime hemorrhagic fever. Hantan, Marburg, Junin, Zika. There are some models and examples of hemorrhagic disease viruses. Some viruses, root and entrance is from extracellular. Some of them are intracellular. Intracellular, just as varicella zoster. I told you it is reinfection. The virus is in the body. And some of them from out of cell. For example, common cold. For example, measles. For example, rubella. And mumps. And the last section, the viruses are so psychophilic, or they are so interested to cool situation. Psychophilic. Or they are so interested to cool situation. All are virus. My friend, all are viruses can tolerate 37 centigrade for some hours. But we have some exception in viruses. For example, HBV, papoviruses, and scrappy, a kind of perion, can tolerate 50 to 60 centigrade for about 1 hour. They are so resistant to thermal situation. HBV, papovivirus, and scrappy. But all our viruses are psychophilic. The enveloped virus, the first is thermal situation, the second is solvents. All of enveloped virus are so sensitive to solvents, just as ether and alcohol. For example, herpes viride is sensitive to alcohol. But non-enveloped virus or naked virus are resistant to alcohol. For example, picornavirus or poliovirus or papova or parvoviruses. They are so resistant because they have no substrate. They have no bioliquid layer or envelope. Much more of viruses can tolerate pH between 5 to 8. But some viruses, just as enterovirus, can tolerate acidity situation. For example, pH 1 to 2. Radiation, just as ultraviolet and X-ray, destroy the structure of virus and can control multiplication of virus and causes this infection. It is so important, for example, in operation room, you need to ultraviolet for control and disinfection of rooms. Some salts, just as sodium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, and chlorine-magnesium. They cause stabilizing. They cause the salts stabilize the viruses. Stabilize the viruses, and it's so important for vaccine preparation. For vaccine preparation, salts. Without salts, the viruses may be destroyed.
What is the last salt?
This CO2 Mg, magnesium chloride. Detergent, just as nonidet, P40, and sodium dodecyl sulfate and Triton X. This group of detergent dissolve the bilipid layer or envelope. Dissolve the bilipid layer and release the capsid of viruses. Aldehydes, just as formalin, formaldehyde, and butyraldehyde. Aldehyde destroy the nucleic acid of virus. Aldehyde combined with nucleic acid of virus, DNA or RNA, and destroy the nucleic acids. And finally, dyes or colors. Dyes or colors, just as proflavin, methylene blue, acriflavin. Proflavin, these dyes goes to nucleic acid and bind to nucleic acid. And when you have flight situation and light situation, we have dynamic inactivation. It means the virus can grow in dark situation, in the being of dyes, and they would be inactivated when you have some lights and some lights. Any question? Any repeat? You can do